Well, good morning, church. It is good to see you today. I hope you've been enjoying the nice fall weather, as we all have. I know we're excited to get back those three guys who went south to Florida to help and see what we can do next. I was hoping to schedule some kind of disaster relief effort for our branch out service this coming Wednesday night, and it wasn't able to happen. But we, as Rich said and so many others, we're going to be looking for ways to be able to continue to contribute with that. And in the meantime, we'll do other things. I think we're going to work with some blessings for a retirement home this week at Branch Out, and we hope that you can join us. So, Netflix has a new show out. It's been causing quite a bit of a stir. If you're in any kind of social media at all, I'm sure you've seen at least a couple references to this 10-episode series on Jeffrey Dahmer. You familiar with this? Yeah, we might have to move on because it's kind of a freaky picture. I might have to put us back on our scripture and move on, right? Yeah, it's been kind of controversial for really a couple reasons. I mean, on one hand, it is kind of, it brings up the trauma that so many victims' families had to endure, and so that's not quite fair to them, and I understand that. But also just the fact that the question's been asked, why are we so into these serial killers and so into these grossly evil events? It's not super healthy to be so obsessed with these kind of things, and yet as a culture we are just into these horrible crimes that happen on a regular basis. Now, I'm not condemning anybody for watching the show. You know, I'm not thinking that you can't watch the show and be a good Christian or anything like that, but I'm also not recommending it either, okay? I just simply want to point out that we have this instinct, this curiosity about these villains, these monsters, as the show is called, that live outside of our social norms. You know, this serial killer show now is breaking all sorts of records with Netflix. It's like the most hours watched of a new show in the first couple weeks or something like that. But last year, about the same time, a show at Netflix was breaking records on Ted Bundy. Another one. And they've kind of figured out, these media and entertainment forums have figured out what we like. And that if we put this out on the market, people are going to stop and they're going to watch it. We're drawn to the monsters, aren't we? We're drawn to the monsters. And it's October now, and we can just see this on the street, right? The skeletons. I saw it for the first time last year, and they're a lot more popular now, but I was dropping my kids off for daycare in like the first week of October. And I was driving through Miamisburg, and there was a 12-foot skeleton. It was like peering in these people's second-story window, and it threw me off completely. But the skeletons, the cobwebs, you know, this spooky stuff, whatever, it's all over the place. And I really think that this is why this came out now, to kind of fit with that season. And like I said, I'm not making hard judgments on this stuff. I just want to point out that there's a phenomena that humans in general are drawn to the villains and monsters of the world. So in light of the fact that this is so culturally center stage right now, I thought we could try to capture some of that momentum and use it for our own purposes, okay? You know, the Bible has its own morbid stories. The Bible has its own monsters. So I thought, well, you know, if this is so relevant right now, why don't we do our own series? Checking out the villains and monsters of the Bible. So this is what we're going to do for the month of October. We're going to take 4 or 5 lessons and pull out these biblical villains and monsters, peeking behind the curtain to see their weird or sometimes maybe even scary stories, but also finding with that some spiritual truths and some application to help us build better non-villainous lives along the way. And so I'd like to start off this series this morning with a story that you've probably heard before. It's found in our Gospels, you know, and ironically, as it's a biblical story, scary movies have adopted bits and pieces of this story in their cinematography or whatever for a long time, especially a name you'll see today, the name Legion. You've seen that thrown around in secular pop culture as well as, but it comes from the Bible. So we're going to look at that story today in Mark chapter 5. We'll just start right in verse 1. They went across the lake to the region of the Gerasenes. When Jesus got out of the boat, a man with an impure spirit came from the tombs to meet him. This man, he lived in the tombs, and no one could bind him anymore. So apparently at one point they could bind him, and at this point they couldn't bind him anymore, not even with a chain. For he had often been chained, hand and foot, but he tore the chains apart and broke the irons on his feet. No one was strong enough to subdue him. Night and day among the tombs and in the hills, he would cry out and cut himself with stones. So we'll just take a pause for a second. You can see why on a monster series I would want to kind of start right here, right? I mean, this is absolutely a scary image. You know, some of us have read this story. If you grew up in church, you've probably read this story so many times that you can hear it without even batting an eye. But when you really take it in, I'm pretty sure none of us have seen with our own eyes a sight quite this scary, okay? Now imagine you're there. Imagine you're one of the disciples in the boats with Jesus and you're coming to shore, and all of a sudden there's this big, unshaven man, naked and bleeding, leaving with pieces of chain still hanging off of his wrists and his ankles, and he's charging down at you. That's scary, okay? That's scary. I'd be telling Jesus to float a little further on down. We'll park in a different spot, okay? I wouldn't be going to land if I saw him coming out from a graveyard on top of it, of all things. You know, this guy, he's in rough shape. The description Mark gives us here, it sounds like he's describing an animal more than it sounds like he's describing a person, wouldn't you say? Naked, living outside apart from the town, howling throughout the night. In fact, the Greek word here, when it said that they would try to subdue him, that's a word you use for animals. There's not a lot of places where they talk about subduing people with that same word. That's something you would do for wild or domesticated animals. You see, at a base level, we get this feeling that this man has been completely stripped of his very humanity, right? This isn't the description of most human beings. He has been stripped of a regular human life. And to that point, we can see that not only was he hurting physically, he was also hurting relationally, both in physical shambles and cut off from his community. And let me explain that for a second. You know, by Old Testament law, anyone who came into contact with the dead, which included the tombs, was unclean for 7 days. You were unclean for 7 days. As an unclean person, you were not allowed in public spaces. You could not worship in the temple. You could not go shopping in the market. You could not go out to restaurants or out into town with your friends. Really, you were not even supposed to be in that close of quarters with your own personal family until those 7 days were over and you were thereby cleansed. But this guy was living in the tombs, right? He was right there in the middle of them. There was no end to those 7 days because every day he woke up, a new 7 days started. In fact, to that point, Number 19 says that those who failed to purify themselves from, quote, the pollution of the tombs should be cut off from Israel completely, right? And that's the lifestyle this man was living. So he was in complete isolation. He was completely alone. And we have to wonder who he was before this story, right? Who was this man before he was living among the tombs, howling out in the middle of the night, cutting himself with stones? You know, we know he had a family. Later in the story, Jesus mentions that he has a family, but what does that include? Was there a wife? Were there kids? Was there siblings or parents? You know, who did he used to be? Who did he used to love? Who was it that loved him before he became this thing out in the wilderness? We've talked about it, especially recently in our series on the importance of church, but we're meant for relationship and community. We are created for community, but now he had lost all friendships. He lost all friendships, family, and relationships in general. He had no one to love him, no one to comfort him. His only companions would be the demons that were there tormenting him. And I just think, what a sad image of a man who's been completely rejected from society. He's literally, see this, he's cast off to live in the land of the dead while he's still living. To say, hey, you're not dead yet, but you might as well be. This is where you belong with all the other people who have passed on. You know, I don't think we can say enough about the sheer desolation this man is living in, if you want to call it living, and I don't know if you would. You know, he has little to no control of his life because of these demons inside of him. He's in constant pain from the demons using his own body to cut and hurt himself. He has been cut off from everyone and anyone who he's ever loved. And now his only human interaction His only companions are the demons, right? But his only human interaction would be when they come and try to chain him down and cage him up. To me, the picture that Mark is painting for us is absolutely that of a monster, all right? This is the image of a monster, a real-life monster who is suffering, who is out of control, who is dangerous. And it's a scary scene. It's kind of morbid. But like our other monsters in our world today, it's also sad, unnecessarily destructive, and chaotic. And Jesus, he comes and he encounters this monster to change all of this, though. Jesus encounters this monster so that this does not have to be his identity anymore. Let's continue in our story, picking up back in Mark 5:6. When he saw Jesus from a distance, he ran and fell on his knees in front of him. He shouted at the top of his voice, "What do you want with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? In God's name, don't torture me." For Jesus had said to him, "Come out of this man, you impure spirit." Then Jesus asked, "What is your name?" "My name is Legion," he replied, "for we are many." And he begged Jesus again and again not to send them out of the area. A large herd of pigs was feeding on the nearby hillside. The demons begged Jesus, "Send us among the pigs, allow us to go into them." He gave them permission, and the impure spirits, they came out, and they went into the pigs. The herd, about 2,000 in number, rushed down the steep banks into the lake and were drowned. So I find this interesting. On one hand, you have this man who is so strong that he is literally breaking chains in half. He's just snapping himself free from being chained down. Not to mention he's empowered by a legion of demons, okay? And a legion was a Roman military unit, the largest, actually, Roman military unit. They think it was about 6,000 soldiers. And so he's there, and you can probably just see it on him, the muscles to be able to break chains and being empowered by all these demons. And then on the other hand is this guy with no real physical attributes to mention, okay? Nothing really special about his physical quality that you would want to bring up. And you see these two folks, the strong one and the normal one, they're squaring up. What does conventional wisdom tell you is going to win that battle? Right? Yeah. My money's on the big guy, is what you'd hear, right? A lot of people are going to assume it's the big guy, the strong guy, who's going to have the hand over the guy who looks like he's nothing special. That is, if you don't realize that the guy who looks like he's nothing special is the incarnate God, right? And there's not even a struggle. There's not even a struggle here. In the movies, when two people from opposite sides meet up, you expect some action, right? When the good guy and the bad guy are there, you expect them to duke it out until it's over. I've always been a real big John Wayne fan. I was raised on John Wayne. And at every one of these cowboy movies, at the end of the show, John Wayne and the bad guy lined up in the middle of town, and there was either a fist fight or a shootout, and you saw the good guy win and the bad guy get put in the dirt, right? That's how we expect these kind of encounters to go. But in this story, it's not a big showdown. It's not a big battle, is it? Instead, we have Jesus gets out of the boat. The man falls to his knees in defeat, okay? It's really pretty anticlimactic if you think about it. But that's the point. That's the point. Against the one true God, 6,000 demons, they don't even try to put up a fight. They've already lost, and their last option is simply to beg on their knees. And it's almost comical, They have to sit there and ask for permission to run away. That's what they're doing. They're asking for permission to run away. So, being unclean spirits, forcing a man to live in the unclean cemetery, it's only natural that they would want to enter into one of the most unclean things in the Jewish law, the pigs, right? It kind of fits their MO. So Jesus allows them to enter the pigs, and in the same way that they mutilated and damaged this man, by cutting him, thus marring the image of God that he represented and turning him into a monster. They follow the same kind of pattern in the pigs. They go out and destroy another piece of God's creation by killing the pigs. That's just what they do. That's what demons and things of evil do. They kill. They destroy. They damage. And that should scare us a little bit. But just a little bit, okay? It should scare us a little bit, but just a little bit. Because we follow the one who is greater than all evil, don't we? We belong to the one who cannot be defeated, who cannot be undone. A key part of this story is to see the power of Jesus. As a whole legion of demons are brought to their knees and cast out of a man who humans for so long were trying to fix and trying to contain, and they couldn't do anything about it. The power of Jesus is seen as they're cast out in one simple word. And that's a God worth celebrating, isn't it? That's a God worth worshiping. Let's go ahead and finish our story. Those tending the pigs ran off and reported this in the town and the countryside, and the people went out to see what had happened. When they came to Jesus, they saw the man who had been possessed by the legion of demons sitting there, dressed in his right mind, and they were afraid. Those who had seen it told the people what had happened to the demon-possessed man, and told about the pigs as well. When the people began to plead with Jesus to leave their region, then the people began to plead with Jesus to leave their region. As Jesus was getting into the boat, the man who had been demon-possessed begged to go with him. Jesus did not let him, but said, "Go home to your own people and tell them how much the Lord has done for you and how he has had mercy on you." So the man went away and began to tell in the Decapolis how much Jesus had done for him, and all the people were amazed. So this story is weird, okay? There's a lot of weird, crazy turns in many different ways. But let me just reread for you one time what I think is maybe the weirdest sentence in this entire story. And it's in verse 15 if you have your own Bibles open. It says, "When they came to Jesus, they saw the man who had been possessed by the legion of demons sitting there, dressed and in his right mind, and they were afraid." Do you catch the irony there a little bit? Bob is sitting here, dressed and in his right mind. That doesn't scare me, okay? You're welcome to look at your neighbor. Hopefully they're dressed and in their right minds, and you're probably not afraid. I've never really been afraid because someone was dressed and in their right mind. Now, if they're missing one of those two things, I might be afraid. But you see how weird that is? That he was sitting there dressed in his right mind, and they were afraid because of that? It was no longer the man who they were afraid of, though, is it? They had been. They had been chaining him down because they were afraid of him. But it was no longer the man they feared, but now it was the power of Jesus that had transformed him. The power of Jesus that was strong enough to give him back his life. This man went from being naked to being clothed, from being possessed by demons to being freed, from being shackled in the cemetery to kneeling at the feet of Jesus. He was a living monster, but Jesus gave him back new life as an image bearer of God. And that's the message, okay? That's the message for the early readers of Mark. That's the message for us here today. Because whether we acknowledge it or not, all of us, in some way or another, have been the monster in the story, haven't we? We've all been the monster in the story. Some of us have an easier time accepting that than others. But while we're not possessed by a legion of demons or living in the cemetery, we've all looked at ourselves at one point or another and said, "What in the world happened to me? This is not who I am. I can't even recognize myself anymore." While I don't think anybody should be defined by their worst moments, everybody in the world at one point has felt like this demon-possessed man, has felt like the monster. We've looked down and we've seen the mangled cuts across our body. We felt the rejection of the world around us, and we've been constantly reminded by just the bits and pieces of shackles and chains that still kind of dangle from our wrists. We know the feeling of being the monster. But the beautiful truth is that there is a God in heaven who looks down and sees through all of that. And instead of seeing a monster, what he sees is a precious son or a precious daughter. And so he sent his one true son to die for us so that we, like the man in the story, might be freed from our chains, freed from our demons, to kneel at the feet of God. God was not content to let that man suffer as less than human. He was not content to see this man who was made in the image of God live like a monster. He intervened to free him so that he can live a new and better life. And he's done the same thing for you. He's done the same thing for you. We no longer have to be seen as the monster. We no longer have to live like the old creature, because the old is gone and the new creation has come, like Elijah read for us earlier. We have been made new in Christ Jesus. He is strong enough to defeat all of our demons, all of our iniquities, all of our sin. The only question that remains is, what will you do with that transforming power of Jesus? Will you fear what the future may hold and send him out of your life, like the town people did, who saw the power of Jesus, but it was just so much they weren't comfortable with it, so they cast it out and sent him away? Or will you be like the freed man, not the monster, the freed man, who was found renewed and restored by the power of Jesus, spreading the message everywhere he could? If you like that freedom today, it is available every single day, at every moment. We invite you to take hold of it in baptism. You're invited to come forward and take it right now as we stand and as we sing.